Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jew Folk. This week, I talk with Rabbi Joey Glick, the new associate rabbi at Shir Tikvah in Minneapolis. We talk about having the interim tag removed from his title, the winding road that led him to the rabbinate, and settling into his South Minneapolis community on this week's Who the Folk podcast. But before we hear from Rabbi Joey, be sure to check out the refreshed TC Jew Folk merch store with newly designed stickers, shirts, hats, and tote bags that help support our mission and help you look fun and stylish. Check it out at tcjewfolk.com/store. Rabbi Joey Glick, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks so much for the opportunity to talk. It feels like a sweet marker. I think we spoke about a year ago when, shortly, after I arrived here, and it feels like a Minnesota rabbi rite of passage to check in with you annually.
Sort of like a one-year check-in with you and your when we talked last year, you were the interim rabbi at Shir Tikvah. Now we get to remove the interim tag.
Yeah, which is
your title, sweet, which is really nice.
Yeah, sweet transition, and just nice to have the stability in the cities.
So, I guess what is that like for you? You move to a city, that the title is interim. You're hoping that it gets extended. I guess as you go through the year, meeting the community, and then going through the process, administratively to sort of get the interim tag removed. How does that affect you in your sort of day-to-day work? Does it affect you in your day-to-day work?
Not hugely. I came in with a 1-year contract, with kind of the hope on all sides that it would feel like a good fit, and I just feel really thankful that from kind of my first days in the community, I felt it's also as making a transition. There was some niceness, there was some sweetness to know, I think, on my end, that if this wasn't going to work, then I myself and my partner could move on to the next thing. But it felt pretty clear pretty early on by high holiday times that I certainly wanted to stay here, and I feel thankful that it seems like the community was on a similar page and was able to negotiate a contract. So I began having conversations with my boss, Rabbi Ariel, and with our board in like November of last year. So the wait wasn't particularly long and ominous, and I kind of had a sense that I'd have the stability to be around here for a little while.
That's nice. You got here in June of 22, and you sort of 5 months later you're having that conversation. It's got to feel good in knowing that that you got off to a good start, that it was worthy of you wanting to stick around and them wanting you to stick around.
Yeah, I mean, more than anything that I did or didn't do, it felt like such a comfortable kind of cultural fit between what I had to offer and what the community had to offer. Just felt well aligned, and so it's felt, and that's I'm so thankful. There's so many. It's a rabbi's market right now. There's more jobs than rabbis.
Yep.
Which means that there were options you get kind of all over the country. And I'm a anxious, neurotic person, and so making any given decision stresses me out to no ends. And the fact that I was made the decision to come out here, and that Shir Tikvah made the decision to invite me out here, knowing that it just feels like a sweet place to land, alleviates a lot of that anxiety.
Back in the old days, but I mean, even like 5 years ago, for certainly pre-pandemic days, rabbis, generally speaking, would get to come out for a weekend, and you sort of get put through your paces on the bima, meeting with congregants, doing different sort of community activities, and figuring out if that's the right fit. To be able to have a longer term stint in a community, I think, is probably good on a lot of different levels for both you as the clergy and the community that you're coming in to maybe serve, right? It feels like this is a positive shift in what's a challenging market right now for clergy and synagogues.
Yeah, and to be clear, I did that as well, which was great. Uh, I when I was considering coming out here right after Passover of 2022, I was interested. The community was interested, and came out here and did kind of a grand bagel tour of
Okay.
the cities. I will not reveal which was the best bagel in my experience, but had the opportunity to get to meet the community, to teach in a few different settings, to talk with about 20 different people, and to walk around Lake Harriet about 40 times that weekend.
Sure.
And so it was really sweet to have that inclination, and then also to have, as you said, about 3 or 4 months of getting to know folks in a deeper way and get a kind of an embodied sense of what it was like to be here, to have clarity of making sure that it was the right place, for me to make sure that it was the right place for me to land, and for the community to make that same determination.
And you're fortunate that you got to come and do that at around Passover, because plenty of other clergy I've talked to have come in like February or January, where you don't get to walk around Lake Harriet, or if you do, you're probably in snowshoes, and it's a way less comfortable experience.
Just walk straight over the lake. It's not my it's not my first time in this rodeo, as I was looking at colleges, as a young person, visited Carleton
Oh, sure.
on the first nice weekend of the year, and was assured by the admissions folk that it was always 60 degrees with sunshine and the wind coming from the cereal factory. So it seems to be a pattern in my life that I've landed in Minnesota at the right moment.
And you've got experience working, this is something we talked about last year that I don't actually think the article went too in depth on, but like you've worked in the Northeast, right? So it's like you're not unfamiliar with, winter.
Yeah, by no means. I served communities in northern New England, and in central Vermont, the Adirondacks on the Maine coast. And my partner was living in just on the kind of foothills of the White Mountains. So I spent
Oh,
my
sure.
couple of years of rabbinical school with my little two-wheel drive Mazda, scaling up and down various mountain ranges in snowstorms, which was a delight. I have to say, one quick, this is neither here nor there, but one quick, a high moment of my time at Shir Tikvah so far. I was giving a sermon during mud season, and it was just I don't know anything, but it seemed like it was an extended, March and April of it being, inches of slush on the ground. And I made a passing comment to, during this past week when so many of us have had soggy socks. And the Zoom chat during the service exploded. I looked at it afterwards. There were like, 10 people who immediately wrote like, Rabbi Joey has soggy socks. Like he must not be wearing the right footwear. Like what? Like who's taking Rabbi Joey to Midwest mountaineering this week to make sure that he gets his rubber boots on, which just feels like such a Minnesota thing and such a Shir Tikvah thing.
Yeah, for sure. Also, I've never heard it referred to as mud season, but once
Well,
you
maybe
pointed out
that's
like the time of year, I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. I get
that might be a Vermont language thing. I'm not sure.
But like it totally checks out, right? Once you sort of said, March, April slush, I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of works. So I'm sort of interested, what, going back to like, pre Shir Tikvah and pre, rabbinic school even, what was it that got you interested in the rabbinate in the first place?
Going back, many years, I was grew up in Western Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, and decided to go very, very far away for college. I went to school in Colorado Springs, Colorado, at Colorado College.
Mm-hmm.
A really sweet place. However, it's like, moving from a landscape that essentially looks like the city's green, green cliffs into water, blue, cloudy blue skies to what felt like the face of Mars. The landscape, the landscape, and in some ways, the culture was just so different than what I grew up around. The sheer mountain going into high plains and desert, you could see, forever, as opposed to the kind of very narrow, held-in, cozy landscape and horizon that I grew up around. And that was really like shocking to my system. My surprise, I ended up the one place in Colorado Springs and on campus that felt like a really comfortable spot, I think partially because of this, was the college's cross-shaped chapel. Shove Chapel. It was, beyond being in the shape of a cross, it was this beautiful neo-Gothic revival church that was just filled with wonderful interreligious programming. I had grown up, going to a conservative synagogue, wasn't particularly into Jewish stuff, and hadn't interrogated my own tradition a whole lot, but found myself really longing for the kind of dark, cozy space of the chapel and falling in love with the conversations that were going on in there. Years into kind of those conversations with my two Christian witchy college chaplains, I was about to graduate, and asked them, if I'm interested in exploring and thinking more about this sort of work of bringing people across difference together to talk about ideas, but to talk about ideas in this heart-centered way, like, how do I do that? How do I become a chaplain? And these two, again, witchy Christians, said, like, Joey, you must go and study the Talmud.
What? Those are not the people that's not the response I expected from the people you described.
Yeah, exactly. I think they had a sense that I was getting grounded in spiritual practice, and they wanted me to see what would happen if I got grounded in the spiritual practice of my own tradition. And what I found out is, I had been kind of resistant to this as a kid who'd grown up with reading disabilities, and just I recently found like a learning evaluation from when I was in third grade, saying, Joey is a cute and intelligent little boy who will never learn a foreign language other than English. And, which, I found this years into my studying Hebrew. I was like, oh, that does make some sense. But I'd been resistant to picking up another language when reading throughout the course of my life had been so challenging. And what I found was there was something about Talmud study and something about the ways that people around that time in the early 2010s were just starting in a big way to teach Jewish texts in a wider and progressive spaces that really worked for me and worked for my brain. For one, there was a big emphasis on the places that I started learning to study, places like Machon Hadar in New York and the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, and Pardes in Jerusalem. These places had a big emphasis on reading very, very slowly. And that really worked for me. And in turn, when I was reading these texts very, very slowly, I learned that they had this inherent desire to argue with themselves, and to question the questions deeply. Yep. And it felt so familiar to the ways that my brain operated. Essentially I stewed in that for like a decade. And along the way, I worked in a variety of interreligious dialogue spaces. I spent some time working at Vassar College, eventually as the Jewish chaplain there, and found this stuff to be really compelling. I think to put a long ending on a long answer, the moment where I really thought, okay, I was more or less doing the work in the world that I had imagined, as a college student at this point. And the moment where it was really clear to me that rabbinical school was where I needed to head was immediately after the 2016 election. I was serving as a chaplain at Vassar College. My students, many of them were Jews of color and queer Jews, were totally devastated, as was I, by the election. Mm-hmm. And there are, these 19-year-olds far from home, feeling like the country was a country that had, in a lot of ways been against them to begin with, was now, decidedly and explicitly against them. At least that was how it was landing on their soul. They fell apart. And I felt like I didn't have all the tools that I would want to care for those students. At
Mm-hmm.
the same time, I was getting my partner's a midwife, soon to finish her training, and is also a death and dying worker. And around this time of the
Wow.
2016 election, she was getting deep into Chevra Kadisha work, Jewish
Mm-hmm.
burial work, and Jewish volunteers that come together to wash and dress a body for burial. And the two of us started doing some teaching and learning at the intersection of Jewish birth and death. And there was something about the stability and the groundedness of those of the ways that the tradition was treating those moments, and the totally ungrounded, pained experience of my students that felt like I wanted to exist at that intersection of pastoral care and Jewish ritual. And it was like, okay, I've been kind of circling this a little bit, and felt like the time to jump into actually becoming a rabbi to bring those passions together.
Well, I mean, first of all, your partner's background is fascinating, sort of really very much a whole sort of circle of life work thing that she's got going on there,
Yeah,
which I think
absolutely.
is really interesting in its own right. And I feel like she would be a fascinating conversation as well
Yeah,
for this.
please, I'd love to hook you all up. But I mean, the both of us, we met at that same chapel at Colorado College, and both of us were
Okay.
deeply impacted by the experience of the stillness and the kind of spirit of inquiry there. And the two of us, took slightly diverging paths in a vocation that was really born there, of what does it look like to serve people, but specifically, what does it look like to serve people at these moments of liminality, of transition.
Well, I mean, it's funny. Your paths sort of diverged, but in a lot of ways, the work of a rabbi, the pastoral care side of it, really feels like is where those two paths come back together in a way,
Yeah,
at least
absolutely.
towards each other, if not fully parallel, but
Uh,
close.
we joke that on any given day, if one of us is sick, the other could do the other person's job. Adele will be sitting for her exams in the next couple of months, and I've been along for the journey a lot of the way, and she's pretty confident that I could pass the exam. I am significantly less confident. There's another midwife spouse in the Shir Tikvah community, Claude
Oh,
Riedel, and I have plans to try and to see what would happen if the two of us took the exam together. I think our powers combined, we might be able to do
I
it.
think between the two of you, I mean, I think you'd be fine. Claude, who I've also had on this podcast before, so he's a tremendous artist.
Tremendous artist, and also tremendous partner and spouse of midwife and death worker Laurel
Yep.
Riedel. And I feel Laurel and Claude are just uh, two of two of the many people that make Shir Tikvah as extraordinary as it is. But I feel like I've learned so much art just in a few conversations with Claude about like what it looks like to have a deeply grounded Jewish practice, and to support a birth worker, which is birth work, not an easy realm, and being
No.
married to a birth worker, total joy, and also not the easiest.
Well, and I think sort of the idea of talking to other people about exploring Jewish practice. I mean, it sounds like that's helped you in a very deep way, explore your own Jewish practice as well, and sort of is what helped you on the path to where you are, is having those kind of spiritual conversations.
Yeah, totally. The founder of Hebrew College's rabbinical school, one of the co-founders, Art Green, talks about Hebrew College as being a rabbinical school for Jewish seekers,
Oh, interesting.
for Jewish seekers to then go on and serve seekers. And that feels, when I heard that, I was like, okay, sign me up. Which has just made so much of the work of being a Shir Tikvah a total joy. I mean, many of the conversations I have with folks um, are with people who are new to Jewish practice as conversion candidates, or new to Jewish practice as Jews who grew up with this stuff but haven't thought of it as a spiritual thing. But almost uniformly, everyone has a deep spiritual practice, and everyone globally, but I think particularly at Shir Tikvah, it's really been really sweet to fall into a community where, almost every one-on-one I do is with someone who has been gardening the same plot of land for the last 40 years, and watching the soil change over that time has meant so much to them, or as a graphic novelist and has been starting, whatever. There's
Yeah.
kind of a dozen stories of these sorts where it's like you scratch below the surface and people are engaged in contemplative life in some really powerful ways.
And I think it seems like, and I'll let you tell me, but it seems like that kind of community at Shir Tikvah sort of fits fits your eye and what you're looking for in a spiritual place pretty well. That's
Yeah,
kind of what helps the relationship work so well.
absolutely. I mean, I think one of the kind of discrete buckets of things that I get to do at Shir Tikvah is manage our adult education program. And what was, clear to me when I visited the community before committing to come out here, and has only been kind of redoubled, is on kind of every level. I Shir Tikvah is diverse in a lot of ways. I think one thing that's pretty homogenous is it's a community of learners. Many times when I'm speaking, I'll have a text or a question in mind on, that I'll come across over the course of a weekend, and then on Wednesday I'll have the chance to lead tefillah at for our jammy for our youth programming, and we'll ask that question to a collection of 100 third through seventh graders, and we'll get wild and gorgeous responses, and then bring that question to our morning minyan on Thursday morning, which is like this wonderful collection of community elders who will just I'll bring the answer that an eighth grader brought on Wednesday to the community elder minyan on Thursday, and then get to reflect on Friday and bring the community this tapestry of these answers, and then hear kind of more from the community, to be able to have a community where I trust that I can bring a strange question that a Jewish commentator asked 1,500 years ago, and know that people will be hungry to pick that up, is just like it makes any element of this work that is challenging gets kind of washed away with the joy of getting to have that sort of dialogue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's great that there's this community that you can have these sort of deep and interesting conversations with, and that you can get just such diversity in answers to these sort of big life questions too.
Yeah, both diversities of answers, and sometimes the 8-year-old and the 78-year-old will be like vibrating on the same frequency, which is also that's a joy to witness.
Right. I mean, I think that says a lot about the kind of either the kind of work the synagogue's doing or the kind of questions you're exploring.
And also like the sorts of questions that, the Talmud and the Midrash and Hasidic thinkers have been framing over the years, that like this stuff is still alive for folks.
That's which is fantastic. So now that you've been here a little over a year in the community, are you, and with the Shir Tikvah community, are you feeling more settled in terms of just the day-to-day, both professional, personal? Like, do you feel like you're sort of settled and dug into the community?
Yeah, I mean, I look at colleagues, in the cities that have been, with communities for decades. It's like, wow, that's a different brand of settled. But I've had a pretty, transient last decade, and so to be somewhere for 2 years in a row is like, oh my gosh, like. So there's some level to which it's just like, wow, I feel more grounded here than I have in a lot of places.
Right.
And just it feels like, I've heard that Minnesota is a challenging place for transplants, and I still haven't found that. Like it's in a lot of the, Adele and I over the years have moved to the Bay Area. We've moved to Boston. We've schlepped around, and it feels like the cities have been kind of some of the easier places to land, in terms of kind of not only getting to land in this great community, and a community that is expecting me to be learning alongside them, and getting to make mistakes alongside them, but also getting to land in a community where we live a stone's throw from Powderhorn Park, and I'll walk in the park many days and see the same friend, meditating on the same bench at
Uh-huh.
the same time,
Yeah.
and see the same dog walker and pass the same religious school family. And there's just I feel deeply happy to have landed in South Minneapolis, which just feels like a place with a lot of both depth and relationships to grow deeper in, but also just like a baseline level of kindness and friendliness, which feel like a really sweet place to enter into.
Well, yeah, I think part of it depends on sort of what time of year you get here too, because yeah, the winters can be hard for transplants, not because of the weather, but because I think people tend to hibernate a bit. There's long stretches of the of the year where I don't really see my neighbors very often, other than like if we happen to be driving out of the neighborhood at the same time and we wave to each other.
Yeah,
It can be a challenge.
I don't envy my partner who moved out here 6 months after I did, in January.
Oh, yeah,
The predictable
that's
stretch of 3 weeks where it was below zero, and never got a whole lot above zero.
yep.
So it's brutal, but even still, like the um, not that either Adele nor myself are that into this, but we have a lot of friends who are polar plunge enthusiasts, and the ability of folks to still, get out and enjoy the cities in the winter has been, impressive.
I know several people who do that, and I don't understand that at all. It just, I mean, listen, you do you, but like that just feels like a lot.
Agreed.
I don't even know. I don't even know how else to put it, but that just feels. Yeah, I'm not sure that's how I'm spending my time. But that's okay. Um, well, last couple of questions for you, and as we're talking, it is we're approaching the high holiday, so I'm sure there is plenty to be done. We'll let you get back to it. First, wrap up question: what is your favorite Jewish holiday? And I always love asking clergy this question. But
Hot take. Tisha B'Av is just gorgeous. So Tisha B'Av, Jewish holiday that marks the destruction, every sad and miserable thing that's ever happened to the Jewish people,
basically, yes.
Including the destructions of the first and second temple and the diasporifying, the exile of the Jewish people. It's a brutal holiday and deeply sad. And oh my gosh, like the ability to read the Book of Lamentations, which has this musical quality to it that sounds like somewhere between Eastern European soulful klezmer and Delta blues. I just it's a deeply moving, powerful, painful work, and chanted is just so gorgeous. And then part of the holiday is to be with each other in sorrow and to sit quietly with folks. I'm not sure what it says about me that I love this time, but it feels like this exercise of having compassion for ourselves, compassion for our people and for each other, and also just getting to sit, at the beginning of the holiday physically on the ground. There's a tradition not to sit in chairs, to be kind of low with folks and to have that slowness. Always is a really powerful day for me.
I believe, and we've done, I don't know, right around 240 of these podcasts. I believe that's the first time Tisha B'Av has been given as an answer.
Happy to record, to record like a normal answer. Purim is delightful.
No. Listen, I appreciate, and this is why I really enjoy. I enjoy asking that question of everybody. There's a reason I ask it of everybody, but also I really love asking it of clergy because you get answers out of the box. I mean, sometimes the answers stay in the box, and that's cool too. But like that was, I mean, a really fascinating response to a question that can be a little sort of mundane sometimes. So I can appreciate that. And it's weird asking you about this when the answer to your last question is a fast holiday. But what is your favorite Jewish food?
So I'll say one from my family of origin and one from my current family.
Fair enough.
Family of origin. I come from deep Midwestern roots, even though I grew up in Pittsburgh. My mom grew up in Champaign-Urbana in central Illinois. And her mom, Faye, made a mean noodle kugel, which was written up in the early 60s in the Champaign Gazette as Faye Tepper's creation of a new noodle pudding. Um, and that the framed article is, in my mom's kitchen. It's delicious. It's sweet, not sour cream oriented, eggy,
Okay.
thin mini, excellent. And then in my current household, my partner is a German Jew. She comes from deep Frankfurtian Jewish heritage,
Okay.
and her family has a recipe for a popular Frankfurtian Jewish food, special cooking, which is a plum pie. It's made with this very Italian plums, which are impossible to find. Adele and I always drive around wherever we are around this time of year trying to find a Italian plum tree. It's served during Rosh Hashanah. The pie itself is round. You cut the plums so that you're supposed to use exactly 36 plums, double high.
Okay.
And you're supposed to cut them so that they look like little crowns for Rosh Hashanah, which is this holiday that is about, amongst other things, about crowning God as king. So it's a totally amazing pie. I encourage folks to look it up. No idea how to spell it though, so special cooking.
Well, I may need to reach out to Adele, have her email me a spelling so we can at least include that in the show notes and people can check it out. Well, Rabbi Joey Glick, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate getting this time to talk with you, and best of luck to you and to Adele as she takes her exams, and Shana Tova to you both.
Shana Tova, and I hope, I'm assuming that kind of all of our lives in the professional Jewish world are, a bit chaotic during this moment of the year. So just a lot of love and peace to you and Elul, and may it be like not the most chaotic time of your life.
Thank you. Much needed and much appreciated. I thank you. The Who the Folk podcast is a part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network and a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.